Did you see Sam talk to Ezra Klein today? Yes, I did. He had a long interview with Ezra that, wow, seemingly went on for an entire hour, as a matter of fact, almost an hour, where this is a different E. Klein, not the E. Klein that all of you drama perverts are thinking of. This is Mr. Abundance. He's also wanted to come on my stream as well. The thing is, like, I don't know enough about abundance. It started off as an interview, and then I think it turned into more of a debate because of the differences in opinion between Sam Seder and Ezra. I will give you the full rundown. Ezra is a full-on piece of shit. Okay, that seems a little bit aggressive. He is a full-on piece of shit. I think he's just a liberal, man. God damn. I will give you the full rundown. Chatter wants Bobby's news, but also doesn't want to get deported to El Salvador. Yeah, my hate for liberals is pure. Yeah. Sam was saying he could have gone another hour. Oh, I can see it. Full rundown. I hate him. Really mad. Abundance is neoliberalism with a new coat of paint. That's what it sounds like from everything that I have seen, all the bits and pieces that I've seen of the book. But like I said, I haven't read it. I have not read it, so I don't know. I don't know enough. I don't have an opinion on it. Other than a lot of annoying people have defended it. But I have a little bit of a soft spot for this E. Klein, I will admit. So who knows? I think he is 100% a liberal. I disagree with his worldview, but having said that, I do think that he is genuine. Not that it makes all that much of a difference. Listen, I want to build housing, but it won't happen by turning our cities over to tech bros and private developers. Are Klein's your kryptonite or something? No, I mean, I like Ezra Klein.
You were on the Iglesias' show, I guess the Slow Boring podcast, and mentioned that we hadn't responded. So we wanted to have you on to talk about the book. We had Paul Glastis on from Washington Monthly, your old haunt.
Oh, where I interned. Love Paul.
With a critique that was, I think, like a middling critique. Some of the proposals that were brought up in the book. But let's just start with you outlining, like, what thematically, what is the book about?
The book is about a very simple question, which is, what do we need more of and how do we get it? And then the parts of the book that I think have aroused more controversy, critique, energy, conversation, is that much of the book is exploring the question of why in the places Democrats govern, or in the times when Democrats govern, are liberals, are Democrats, are in some cases people on the left, unable to produce more of the things we need. Why is there so little housing in California and New York? Sam, where are you? Just so I have you
in New York.
You're in New York. So why in places like New York and California and Illinois, where you have a lot of Democratic control, have they become very unaffordable? Why is it very hard to cite enough clean energy, even though that's become a major project for the Democratic Party? Why is so much that we do so goddamn slow? Medicare released its Medicare cards a year after it was passed into law. Getting prescription drug prices negotiated on 10 drugs took 3 years and will only go into effect this year, just in time for Donald Trump to take advantage of it and brag that it was him who did it. So this question of the sclerosis of liberal government, how do we actually make it deliver the things it is promising to deliver, is the core inquiry of the book.
And the culprits run across, I guess, like four sort of main silos, as far as I can tell. Like we have the regulation and bureaucratic red tape, and this is a problem both in terms of like building infrastructure and to some extent within the context of housing. There are that housing is also addressed by like local, I guess, incumbent groups that have power there. The infrastructure, again, some of that bureaucratic process is a function, and we'll get into this, is a function of environmental regulations that end up getting abused in some fashion. And then in the context of like of science and innovation, it is a sort of a risk-averse funding. But let me, before we go into some of the specifics, from your perspective, because I've been reading a lot of there's a lot of reviews of the book out there. It's also,
have you read the book?
I have. Well, I've listened to the book. Let's put it that.
That's as good.
And to me, I like your read better than Derek's. Okay, but I've listened to both.
All right, if you that just gives me a sense of at what level we're talking.
That's a different critique. But yes, I have read the book, and I've also read there's a tremendous amount of reviews about the book.
What is your critique of the book? I want to answer your critique of the book.
Well, I will get to that. Okay. I will get to that. But from your perspective, is this a policy or a political book?
Oh, I don't think you can separate those two.
Okay,
I mean,
wait, where is it? Someone said, I have trouble with this because I think Democrats, as being very Ezra-like, not Seder-like, it seems like he's arguing for the same solutions, but they just work this time. Yeah, I think that if your identification of the problems with unleashing the government, which is something that he keeps repeating over and over again, is the regulatory mechanisms that offer a setback to new development, new buildings and whatnot, then I disagree with that. I mean, are there instances where you could dial back on some of the annoying inefficiencies? Certainly. But as an advocate for more government, bigger government, there's a point in this conversation where he brings up the public housing or affordable housing units that were built in Chicago that cost $1 billion+. Each housing unit that was created amounted to like $1 million+. And this was like an incredibly costly endeavor. And I personally think this is yet another byproduct of the public-private partnership that takes place in situations like this. And I think that the government can be more efficient. I agree on that front, but it's not through unleashing the private sector in an effort to tackle these problems. I think you'd be surprised with how much Ezra agrees with your regulation takes. Just because he's talking about removing some regulations doesn't mean he's against regulation in general. Yeah, the examples of bad regulations are things like parking space mandates, single staircase stuff. I don't agree with single staircase, for the record. Like, I think that it's good. It's one of the few regulations that's actually decent in America where you have multiple fire escapes. I know that. Look, I know the YIMBY language. Okay, I know that that's one thing that they point to. And the parking space mandates, I understand. That one I do understand. That one is actually a valid form of deregulation, right? Single family homes, like rezoning single family homes in order to build more housing units. I understand that. I agree with that. Okay, upzoning. I agree with that. Having said that, I don't think that this should be done through the private side of things, because everything in America is done through the private-public partnership, and everything in the United States of America that has been done through the private-public partnership has led to tremendous pain, suffering. PG&E is something that Chatter brought up, and here it is. If unleashing the private sector worked, PG&E would be loved, and power in California would be cheap. Power in California is neither cheap nor safe. And that is a great example of the unleash the markets upon a utility company, become a utility provider, and all of a sudden you will unleash great energy. Except that's not what has happened. And as a matter of fact, the counterexamples to this are plenty. Well, I guess not plenty necessarily, but like the Tennessee Valley Authority would be a great counterexample to this. Or if we're going to talk about ISPs, for example, I'm going to go back to Chattanooga, Tennessee. Okay, where the government taking the controls from private enterprise and directly delivering incredibly important utilities like internet has led to tremendous success and much better outcomes for every citizen. Right? Rare Tennessee mention. I know. None of the nitpick deregulations Ezra talks about moves the ball. Housing is built when it's more profitable than other possible investments. The only method that will work is the Vienna model, where we have a robust, commodified housing production that doesn't rely on market logic. I agree with you.
You know my career. I'm a policy
Yes.
reporter from way back, but I think something that has always been central to the way I understand that is policy, politics, and process. And I think this is very much a book about process and proceduralism are all intertwined. The idea that you can peel them apart, that you can say, oh, this bucket is policy, this bucket is politics, is not at all how I look at that question.
Yeah, and I guess we'll start with the policy side first. But broadly, my critique is there seems to be an absence of, well, I think the culprits that you have chosen in some instances are correct, but broadly speaking, there's an absence of analysis of power dynamics. I think that and the interplay of money and politics, or I should say power in our society, I think is problematic.
Please explain why you don't like single staircase zoning. It's a fire hazard. The reason why that regulation exists is because it's considered a fire hazard to have only one exit point. One of the most famous instances of single staircase zoning and the devastation that it contributed to was Grenfell. It's outdated? Okay. This is not an issue with modern fire safety standards. Well, I mean, I just gave you an example of a modern fire safety standard, which had other contributing factors to it, of course, but single staircase zoning is demands from YIMBYs that in order to build housing more efficiently and in order to cut costs in terms of like building new housing, what we must do is stop forcing stop forcing developers to put two staircases at least, and that one staircase is enough. There's a law from like 1910. It needs to be updated. It's not just cutting costs; it costs density. I think New York City 4-floor walk-ups. Yeah, I personally don't think that. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think that it's like the fact that there are two staircases that you have to build that is like this big of a hurdle in building new housing.
I mean, I think that, look, there have been questions about specific policies and assumptions. I've read critiques about your assessment of why China is able to do certain things and whatnot. But and I also think the power questions really filter through a lot of what you perceive to be problematic. And then I think broadly, I think it's also difficult to understand like how this is going to function as a political question. But we will get to all
the second. We'll do the second in a minute.
But let's do
Let
the
me talk about power. Let me talk about power. I have been interested to see this critique develop. And I just had Zephyr teach out on my show. There's an episode with her and Shukat Chakrabarti called Abundance in the Left that I think people would be interested to hear sort of do the power debate at some length. I think this has been very revealing to me about what my friends on the left, and I think of myself usually as on the left, though, liberal, not a leftist, I guess, mean when they say power. I think this is a book entirely about power, but it is a book that treats power highly situationally. So there is a structure of power that arranges itself around, say, a housing development in San Francisco. That is a different structure of power than arranges itself around the question of can you build interstate transmission lines, which is a different structure of power than arranges itself around the question of can you site rural broadband and build that in the way that you want to, which is a different structure of power than you see in a bunch of the other cases in the book. And one thing we are attempting to do over and over and over again is get extremely granular about what is happening. So one thing that bothers me about the power analysis that I hear on the left, let's take housing, because I always think it's very important to ground things in like a specific case. Texas builds more housing than California. It builds more housing than New York. When people move to Austin and Houston and Dallas, they build homes. When people move to San Jose and San Francisco and Los Angeles, they don't. Is your view, do you find it a credible view to say that the issue is Texas has solved the corporate power problem, but California is permeable to corporate power and dominated by oligarchy in a way that Texas, or for that matter, Florida, is not?
Well, I don't know if it's necessarily, I think it's not necessarily corporate power. I think what we're talking about is money. I think we're just talking about money.
So and Texas has solved the money in politics problem, but California does not.
Well, I can tell you that, like, if you want to compare, let's say, San Francisco to Houston, right? You just have a lot more space in Houston. You have a lot more money in San Francisco. And so the power that rests with the money is more concentrated, literally, right? And has the ability in those instances to stop this housing project or that housing project. Like, look at Austin, for instance. You bring up Austin. Mm-hmm. In the course of Austin, and this was, I read this in the review, because obviously I'm not studying Austin or San Francisco for that matter. But Joe Wiesenthal wrote, that his observation about Austin was that it was cheap and then it got very expensive. Then there was, and it was a function of costs went up, rents went up. It became expensive there.
Rents have gone down in Austin because they built so much.
They built so much.
I really want to hold on what you said the first time.
But
San Francisco has concentrated money in a way that
there was no change in the building codes, for instance. Like the argument that
the building code responded in Austin. So you can just go look. You can, I mean, I don't know if you guys are able to pull up data on the show and show it, but just go pull it up if we can. You can search Fred housing starts in Austin and San Francisco. You could just do this in general. You can look at this analysis across blue and red cities.
But
what the difference? Let me just. I want to go through this example, but we can go through a bunch of them. Houston doesn't have a zoning code. That's why it's easier to build there. I mean, I was talking to a developer there, and he said, "Look, the thing everybody knows about Houston, if you're a developer, is it's a bad place to be a homeowner. It's a good place to be a developer." And this is what I mean when I say the whole book, in a way, is about power. That in these procedural questions, in this question of how do you get housing approved, what we have created in many blue cities is a lot of veto points. And that veto point can be used by corporate power. It can be used by moneyed interests. It can be used by local homeowners who are not power in the way we would normally think of them, but sure as hell are power when you're thinking about whether or not to build housing. It can be used by all sorts of players. And so I think that one of the places where
Austin is still much more expensive than it was before the pandemic law. Houston has housing codes. They just put in ordinances. This is all
quite diverge from some of my other friends on this, is that I think when you create this level of proceduralism, this level of veto points, they get captured by interests over time. And that is a place where power can pool. Now, I think the place where I probably part, just to finish the thought, I think the place where I probably part is that I think that the left is often very attentive to power when it is coming from certain recognized villains, and much less attentive to power when it is coming from people who might in other contexts look like allies or just be local homeowners. But that can also be real power wielded in a problematic way.
Well, but you listed off three entities that have power: corporate power, moneyed interests, and homeowners. And I would suggest to you that in all three of those that you just listed, that money is ultimately the controlling factor. So for instance, I can tell you, like, I don't know San Francisco, I don't know Austin, I know Worcester, Mass. And I can tell you that during urban renewal, we had, there was an entire neighborhood that was completely, I don't know if you've ever been to Worcester, gone through 290. There was an entire neighborhood called Laurel Clayton, I think it was, that ended up dumping people into a housing project, Plumley Village. And it was all run by the Worcester Redevelopment Authority. It was completely streamlined. None of the other, what we would call today groups. There was no equity involved in this, or equitable justice or anything like this. And the neighborhood was completely destroyed because the input only essentially came from this big insurance company and the Worcester Redevelopment Authority, which was essentially owned by the same type of people. And I only know about this because a buddy of mine was homeless in high school because of how much destruction generationally it had created as a result of that. And so when you list off those three elements of power, in my mind, those are all moneyed interests. Those local homeowners, I'm sure there are stories of low-income people who own homes in an area that hasn't been redeveloped, is able to stop building. But I would imagine those are very far and few between.
Then I think we should be in agreement, right? If this is the case you're making, then I think we should be in agreement, because there's no doubt that
I'm saying it's moneyed interest.
It's sometimes money interest for sure, right?
Well, what is it the other times?
Let me finish the thought, okay. and then you can give me your rebuttal. When you create these highly legalistic systems, the people with the money to hire lawyers and lobbyists are going to be more capable within them. And so the structure of a society that begins to bury so much in bureaucracy, where you have to know when to show up to the planning meeting and you have to know who the city council members are, like, it begins to structurally favor those who can navigate that society. So when we talk about things like upzoning, where we want to make it possible to build more houses in an area, like,
I think talking about regulatory capture this way, is a very, like, under normal circumstances, this is unironically a Charlie Kirk argument. This is where YIMBYs often lose me, because they start sounding like libertarians, which, by the way, a lot of libertarians are YIMBYs, for the record, where they'll say, like, oh, well, it's because there's a lot of regulatory capture, which is used against people that want to do the right thing. And therefore, deregulation is actually a necessity. When in fact, the solution, I think, is good regulation, not more or less regulation, but good regulation. Ezra's book amounts to, I've talked to middlemen contractors who want to make more profit, and they said accessibility and zoning standards are too hard for us because we want the money. He does not understand the need for central planning to do this. His work fails by siding with the owner class and protecting their money. I mean, if Ezra was a real one in terms of abundance, he would be advocating for centrally planned economy and Chinese style governance. Like, there is no country more abundant than China in that regard. And there's definitely a lot of things that the Chinese government does that we would have to do away with some of the regulation in this country as well. So I guess from that angle, he could also, we could entertain the deregulatory aspect of that.
Like, everybody knows it is almost impossible to upzone a rich area. And that is because they are able to bend this process to their will. Now, you can take a place like California.
All right, well,
right?
let me address that. I mean, I get that point there. And I think that is what worries, I don't know about other people, but that's the type of thing that worries me, because the argument you just made is almost identical to the one that I would have every week with Tim Carney, who I know, back in the day, which is an idea that the problem with wealthy influence, and if you and I agree, then it is money. The problem with it is
we don't agree that it's all money.
Okay,
money is one mechanism of influence.
But I think it is the biggest one. Would you agree with that?
It depends on the issue. So look, there are a bunch of these issues.
Okay, well, let me finish my point about Tim Carney. He would say that you need to have less government. That way it cannot be as corrupted or manipulated by moneyed interests. Now, I don't know if you think that money is the problem 51% of the time or 30% of the time.
I don't think categorically asking that question is, but here, let me say where I disagree with Tim Carney, because maybe it'll clarify where maybe you and I don't agree. Tim wants a less capable state. I want a more capable state. Tim wants a state that does fewer things. I want a state capable of doing more things, including the things it has already promised to do. So when I look at California high-speed rail, I work backwards and I say, what the happened that the state of California could not build high-speed rail, which they can do in Japan, they can do in China, they can do in Europe. Tim looks at it and says they shouldn't be trying to build high-speed rail. And so the disagreement I have with Doge, with a lot of different things, with a lot of my friends on the right, is they want to reduce state capacity. I come at this as a liberal who wants the state to accomplish very difficult things: decarbonizing the economy, building enough affordable housing, including, by the way, public housing, building mass public infrastructure, things like high-speed rail or the Big Dig or the Second Avenue subway here in New York City. And what I see is a state failing to accomplish its goals. Right. Now, they would say, don't try. I would say, fix the state. And one issue with the state.
Yeah, I don't agree. I mean, I don't disagree, but there is a point where I don't agree with him, which is that the problems with the state is not regulations. The problems with the state is that it is basically a slush fund for moneyed interests. It's an endless wallet for middlemen that greatly expand the timeline for projects with no real interest in actually accomplishing said projects. This is why I think like an anti-corruption candidate in America, Latin American style, would probably pop off. And look no further than Donald Trump. What is drain the swamp? Drain the swamp, quite literally, is an argument against corruption, against moneyed interest in politics. Now, of course, Donald Trump is a swamp monster himself, but there's a lesson to be learned from this commentary. Not just on drain the swamp, but even Donald Trump claiming that he is a peaceful candidate. He's a candidate for peace. In terms of what the government that is supposed to have awesome powers should do when dealing with housing, in terms of like unleashing abundance upon the unsuspecting American masses, what the government should be doing is moving in the direction of either becoming, in the short term, a market competitor that forcibly draws down prices with public housing, or even in the long term, completely decommodifying housing in its entirety. Okay? Because the major issue with housing in this country that Ezra also recognizes both in this interview and in his book, that is his contributions to homelessness, that is a gigantic problem. Okay? That the singular, albeit reductive, but the singular most responsible reason for housing being so unaffordable in this country is due to the profit motive, is due to homes being recognized as this dual use shelter, but also a very reliable investment vehicle. Houses are seen as a speculative asset for homeowners, whether they are a single homeowner or own multiple homes. Okay, let's continue.
State is that it has become so highly regulated, not in terms. I find that when I use the term deregulation, like people's brains turn off because they think of deregulation as something that the state does for the market. But no player is more highly regulated than the state itself, often by Republicans, often because of power in the way that you would define it. But I think a lot of liberals, a lot of leftists have, one, and this is my critique going backwards, ceased to see this. But two, they don't take state failure seriously. And when something like California high-speed rail happens or rural broadband, they sort of move on instead of saying, why are we not delivering? We are the people who believe in government. People are pissed at government for a reason. How do we make government deliver?
See, and I think and I think in terms of results, I think you and I are largely aligned. But I think the problem is, and you bring up Doge, and it's ironic that you and Carney will approach it in a very similar way, but anticipate different outcomes. But that being aside, I mean, I think that is where, people get a little bit
But see, I don't think we're approaching it similarly. I think it's at a level of abstraction, it's similar, and then you go granular and it's not at all.
But see, this is what we're talking about. See, like, it's their policy and politics are in the same place. So we have a level of abstraction, we have a level of granular, right? And the point is, the way that these two commingle, I think, becomes problematic, where these two things meet, because your identification of the primary problem, right? I mean, this is the point. Like, you don't address moneyed interest per se in the book. The primary problem is, I mean, if you just do a summary of the book, primary problem has to do more with the regulation and the handcuffing the state has done of itself. But the state doesn't do it itself. Like, all of this handcuffing comes from a place, and it's either moneyed interest or it's not. And I have no doubt that at different times.
This is where I think you've really oversimplified politics. I want to try to find the right example, because I think if we stay high, we just are like yelling about this abstract question of money. But let's talk. We both believe in decarbonization.
I think that's really grounded, though.
Hold on, but let's talk about it from this perspective. We both believe in decarbonization, right? Climate change is a problem.
Yes.
And we sort of see the pathway on that is we have to build a lot of green energy to reorient our economy so you can run a modern economy on a green energy basis. Yeah?
Yes.
Okay. So to do that, you have to move all this energy production over to renewable sources, and then you have to get the energy from where it currently is, right? A solar farm, a wind farm, a hydroelectric, project, whatever it is, and run it through transmission lines to where we plug shit into the wall and charge it. I have done a lot of coverage of this failure point because we are, to be perfectly clear about this, failing to build enough transmission lines. There is no world in which our decarbonization strategy works if we cannot increase by orders of magnitude how fast we are building transmission lines. There is money trying to build transmission lines. There is money trying to slow down the building of transmission lines. Just walking into this process and saying, where's the money, doesn't get you anywhere. Like, I have talked to the private equity figures trying to get a transmission line built. I have also talked to the green, New Dealers trying to get that same transmission line built. And I've also seen the people standing in the way of it who have all their reasonable and good arguments. I don't find, when I dig into these things, that the way I can just repeatedly sort politics is, well, like, over here there's the money and the money is bad, and over here there's the not money and the not money is good. Usually there's money on both sides of it. There are sometimes unions on both.
There's only one country that's doing this right, and it's China, because central planning is state-owned enterprise. Not necessarily. There's other capitalist countries that have done this correctly as well, as better than anyone else, because you love talking about Red Vienna. Singapore has a pretty decent system as well, but again, it's places where, like, the state owns the land. That's the major. Oh, you're talking about transmission lines. Okay, I thought we were still talking about housing as well. Can you turn down video sound and turn up your sound, please? I'm pretty loud, no?
Sides of it. And so the structure of the book, because I hope people come from this and want to read it. The structure of the book is typically working backwards from a problem. We're not building enough housing. If we go granular on that, what can we learn? We're not building enough transmission lines. If we go granular, what can we learn? And I just don't think abstracting out to money tie the state's hands. If money could untie the state's hands on a lot of big building projects, all these developers would do it. But it can't, because the proceduralism takes on a life of its own.
I follow what you're saying, that in each case there are specifics that are different, and you cannot generalize. It sounds like what you're saying.
You can generalize some, but you have to take seriously the specific issues in each case.
I have no doubt.
Your generality should emerge out of the granularity.
Okay, what are the generalities? Like, this is what I guess what I'm asking.
I'm saying
is
the
that,
default in America has become that building, particularly when the state is involved, has become too slow and expensive.
No,
We
no,
have
no.
created an architecture of policy that makes it too hard for us to achieve our goals in the real world,
Who's
and for that
we?
matter, in social insurance. Say it again.
Who's the we?
It depends. I had.
All right.
You're not
Please
gonna
don't
like-
drive to
Here's
me.
a version of the
Well, but I'm
right?
trying to address the point
Yeah.
because, for instance, okay, so I don't
Let me
want
give you a better answer to who's the we.
Well, but why I think this is important though is because this to me is the central question, really, about the book. Because I think like
he is. Am I misunderstanding his point? I get his argument about money, but how is he tying it to deregulation? He's saying that moneyed interests create regulatory capture. Moneyed interests allow big businesses to take advantage of the regulations to price out the competition. That's literally the underlying argument for corporatism versus real capitalism that Charlie Kirk says. It's the same exact argument that libertarians make. It is the unfortunate reality of exhausting all options, even if you are a kind-hearted liberal. It is the unfortunate logical conclusion that you arrive at, no matter what, if you have a dogmatic approach to capitalism. If you have a dogmatic approach to maintaining capitalism, then this will be the major setback, because the advocacy that leftists make towards any initiative, any sort of government interference, is to directly make things unprofitable. That is the goal of the state. And this is a reality that capitalists understand, which is why they hate state interference. Okay? That's why they try to flip the argument on its head. The goal of the state is to unironically engage in, under neoliberalism, this is the exact opposite. The goal of the state is to unleash the markets and even engage in state interference as long as it is at the behest of the profit motive, as long as it is at the behest of the private sector. But the goal of the state should always be to make things more affordable by forcibly making things less profitable. It is about decommodification. That is the reason as to that is why the state should be interfering in these affairs when it comes to housing. I don't personally think plunging into those specifics actually matter. It appeals to bookish, nerdy liberals who think that one bit of arcane knowledge of some obscure, well-intended rule is having unintended consequences. It is fundamentally a conservative outlook and is totally wrong. The reason why we don't have affordable housing is the same reason why we don't have single player, the same reason we don't have public transit. The capitalist class doesn't profit. That's it. No, I agree. His stupid nudge and tax credit fails, so he's defaulting to right-wing deregulationism because he's a neoliberal who hates the government and loves markets. Pure ideology right here from Ezra. He refuses to discuss actual left-wing policy. No, I like that. I recognize that. I don't have as much smoke as you do for Ezra, but I guess I entertain liberalism a lot more, considering that I see it as like a permanent fixture, in American politics and in the Western world in general. But yes, this is the major setback. His dogmatic understanding of capitalism and his interest in maintaining capitalism is causing him to refuse to reckon with what the state's primary function is supposed to be. That's it.
I could say there's some things in it I like, there's some things that I don't like, but the general point is, I think, for instance, like, where does the title abundance come from?
From Derek's piece on abundance.
Okay. We have seen an entire movement build up about abundance, correct? I mean, like, there is a lot of money behind this broad notion of abundance. And Derek, I think it was on the Lex Friedman podcast, said something to the effect of,
well, I do mostly agree with you. Wouldn't making things less profitable just make companies increase prices? Wouldn't you need the state to force lower prices directly by nationalizing things? No. My point is, the state interferes in the market right now under neoliberalism to increase profit margins for private corporations. What the state should be doing is interfering in the markets to lower, to basically create, as a part of the state, to actually create competitive products in an effort to drive down market prices if you want to still, in the short term, exist within a market structure. This is precisely the reason why people don't like public housing. This is the reason why they don't want even the public option, because it would be impossible for an expensive middleman that doesn't need to exist at all, as we all understand and recognize, like private healthcare. It would be impossible for private healthcare to exist where they would have to compete with the state. They would have to consistently limit the things that the state actually offers. They would never want that to be competitive. They would never want the state-owned product of healthcare to be competitive, that you can sign into, that you pay for with your taxes, whether you sign into it or not. They would never want that to be competitive with, United Healthcare, because United Healthcare would cease to exist in that process. It would become impossible to compete with. And that's my argument. It shouldn't exist to begin with. This is precisely the reason why private corporation interference has created this like weird public-private partnership within the healthcare structure that simply makes things more costly. Because as long as that expensive middleman exists, then it's going to consistently seek out profits. You stop the production of the thing you want to make non-profitable. If products weren't profitable, here China's economy would collapse, just so you know, Hasan. Wait, what? First of all, I don't even care about China when we're talking about this, okay? I'm an American citizen. No disrespect to the Chinese, all right? As much as I love China, okay, go ahead. Don't Americans want to destroy the Chinese economy? Okay, then you just made an argument for nationalization in an effort to beef up American national security by undermining our market competitor. There you go. Regarding healthcare, private healthcare exists alongside the NHS within the UK. No, that's cowardly. It shouldn't, for the record. It should not, because as long as there's a private profiteering in this space, then private profit seekers will always undermine the pre-existing free healthcare that the government is providing, and that's precisely why you arrive at the issues with the NHS. They seek to undermine the NHS by getting right-wing politicians and even the Labour Party, which is now firmly a neoliberal party, to undermine the National Healthcare Service by taking away its funding over and over again, by advocating for tax cuts in the process, starving the beast. They're doing Reaganomics, or I guess Thatcheromics, maybe. This is exactly what's going on in numerous provinces. Someone already brought up Doug Ford in Ontario. That's what he's doing. And over time, people get frustrated with the socialized system. It's very difficult to take away things that the government provides, services the government provides, once people are used to it, right? The NHS is supposed to be a thing that British people are proud of, right? There's I think there's literally an NHS Day, if I'm not mistaken. So it takes years and years, decades and decades of underfunding and trying to cripple the NHS structure so that you can start building a private alternative slowly but surely. This is what happens. What I'm talking about here is exactly what has happened in many European countries. That has led to austerity, that has led to anger and resentment from the populations, that then they redirect their attention to like immigrants or refugees or Muslims or whatever the fuck. But that is what has lowered the living standards of all of these European countries. Exactly what I'm talking about. The privatization of previously public services is at the heart of all the ire and anger and resentment that many European nationals feel. And in that anger and resentment, right-wing reactionary parties will redirect their attention to people that look differently than them, refugees, Muslims in general. Can you give a specific example of a socialized service being completely privatized? Let me think. What would be a good example of this? Swedish public education. It did not turn into completely privatized, but there were privatization initiatives that led to horrible results. Railways in England would be another great example of this as well. UK water. England has a lot of great examples of this, by the way. British Railways is a great example of this. The water, like British Water, is another good example of this. Trash pickup in BC. BC Hydro. By the way, our Swedish leftist party has now sued Cry and Dr.C for stealing tax funds and making profits off of it. in the United States of America, it was the internet. I feel like the internet and its invention came at a point where America was already firmly committed to neoliberalism. So I don't even know if there was any time and place where we had a nationalized ISP internet service provider